Before the money, before the envelope, before any of it, there was just a woman standing in the rain outside a dry cleaner's on Calloway Street, holding a plastic bag over her head like it was the most natural thing in the world. Her name was Mabel Orin. She was 43 years old. She wore a gray hoodie that had been washed so many times the drawstrings had gone stiff. Her shoes were the kind you bought at a discount rack without trying them on first, because you already knew your size and you already knew your budget. She had a small scar above her left eyebrow from when she was 9, and her brother dared her to jump off the back porch. She still hadn't told him it had been worth it. That afternoon, Mabel was not thinking about money. She was thinking about whether the 47 bus ran on a modified schedule on Tuesdays, and whether she had enough left on her transit card, and whether her daughter Cassie had remembered to take her inhaler to school. Ordinary things. The kind of things that fill up a life so completely there's no room left for anything else. That was when she saw the envelope. It was sitting on the sidewalk just past the dry cleaner's awning, getting dark at the edges from the rain. A thick envelope, cream-colored, the kind that cost more per sheet than most people spent on lunch. It had slid halfway under a parked car, tucked against the front tire like it had been trying to hide. Mabel almost walked past it. She almost did. But she stopped. She looked down, and something in the weight of it, not heavy, but present, made her pick it up. She didn't open it on the street. She stepped back under the awning of the dry cleaners and turned the envelope over in her hands. There was no stamp, no return address, just a name written in ink that had blurred slightly at the edges from the rain. G. Whitfield, private. Mabel looked up and down the street. The rain had cleared most people off the sidewalks. A man in a delivery uniform jogged past without looking at her. A woman across the street was wrestling with an umbrella that had turned inside out. No one had dropped it. No one was looking for it. She stood there for a long moment with the envelope in both hands, rain drumming the awning above her, and she thought about Cassie's school trip deposit that was 3 weeks overdue. She thought about the notice from the utility company that had arrived last Thursday, the one with the red border. She'd turned face down on the kitchen counter. She thought about the jar on top of the refrigerator where she put whatever was left at the end of the week, and how sometimes there was nothing left, and sometimes there was $1.50, and how she'd told herself both times that it was fine, that they were fine, that they were managing. Then she thought, this isn't mine, just like that, simple as breathing. This isn't mine. She tucked the envelope inside her jacket, against her chest where it would stay dry, and she started walking. The name on the envelope led her to a building downtown that Mabel had walked past 100 times without ever thinking about going inside. It was the kind of building that had a doorman wearing an actual uniform with brass buttons. It had a lobby with floors that reflected the light. It had a front desk staffed by a young man in his 20s who looked at Mabel when she came through the revolving door, the way people look at something that doesn't quite fit. Not cruel, exactly, just assessing. She was dripping on his floor. Her plastic bag was still in her hand. "Can I help you?" he said, in the tone that actually means, "Can I redirect you?" "I'm looking for someone named G. Whitfield," Mabel said. "I found something that belongs to them." The young man's expression shifted slightly. "Mr. Whitfield is a resident here. I can take whatever you found and make sure it gets to him." "I'd rather give it directly," Mabel said. "That's not really. It's a personal document," she said. "The envelope says private. I'd rather give it to the person it belongs to." The young man looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up the phone. She waited by the desk, her wet shoes leaving small, dark marks on the marble. She could feel him glancing at her while he waited for someone to pick up. She could feel the other people in the lobby, a couple by the elevator, a woman in a camel coat on her phone, not quite looking at her and not quite not looking at her either. She had spent her whole life in rooms like this, adjacent to them, not in them. It didn't shake her. She had stopped being shaken by that particular thing a long time ago. After about 4 minutes, the elevator opened, and a man came across the lobby toward her. He was somewhere in his late 60s, heavy-set, with silver hair cut close to his head, and the kind of posture that came from decades of being the person everyone else waited for. He was wearing a suit jacket over a open-collar shirt, like he'd been pulled away from something. He looked at Mabel. She held out the envelope. "I found this on Calloway Street," she said. "About 20 minutes ago, outside the dry cleaners on the corner. It had your name on it." The man, Gerald Whitfield, she assumed, though she still wasn't certain, went very still. He reached out and took the envelope from her, and she watched something move across his face. Not relief exactly, something more complicated than that. He pressed his thumb against the seal, just checking, and it held. Still closed. Still sealed. He looked at her again. This time he was actually looking at her, not the version of her his eyes had assumed when he first walked over. "You didn't open it," he said. "It wasn't addressed to me." "There's money in here," he said quietly. "Significant money. You couldn't have known that, looking at the outside, but—" He stopped. "You're standing here soaking wet. It started raining about a block from here," Mabel said. "How did you find this address? The name?" "I looked it up." He was quiet for a moment. The couple by the elevator had gotten on and disappeared. The woman in the camel coat had moved away. It was just the two of them and the young man at the front desk, who was doing an admirable job of pretending to look at his computer. "I'd like to give you a reward," the man said. "That's not necessary." "I'm aware it's not necessary," he said. "I'd like to do it anyway. Thank you," Mabel said. "But I'm fine. I hope whatever's in there is helpful to you." She gave him a small nod, the kind that ends a conversation cleanly, and she turned to go. "Wait," he said. She turned back. "At least let me." He paused. He seemed like a man who was not often at a loss for words. "Can I ask your name?" she told him. "Mabel Orin." He said it like he was writing it somewhere in his mind. "Thank you, Miss Orin." She walked back out through the revolving door into the rain. She didn't tell anyone about the envelope that night. Not Cassie, who was 14 and sharp as a pin and would have asked exactly the right questions in exactly the wrong order. Not her neighbor Dolores, who meant well but whose idea of keeping a secret was waiting 48 hours before telling her sister. Not her mother, who would have asked why she hadn't just taken the money, in a tone that was more exhausted than accusatory. Mabel just made dinner. Pasta with the jar sauce that Cassie pretended to hate but always had seconds of. She listened to Cassie talk about a disagreement she'd had with her science partner about whether baking soda volcanoes were, quote, "an embarrassing cliché." She laughed in the right places. She asked the right questions. She didn't think about the envelope, or she tried not to. The truth was, she had thought about it the whole walk home. Not with regret, that wasn't the shape of it. More like the feeling of putting down something heavy you've been carrying and noticing after how light your arms feel. She had been standing on that sidewalk in the rain with enough money to change her year, maybe her few years, and she had thought this isn't mine and meant it completely. She wasn't naive. She knew some people would have kept it. She knew some people would have said she'd earned it just by being honest, just by going through the rain, and that the universe owed her the rest. She'd had that thought too, in a back corner of her mind, the way you hear a voice through a wall, present but not clear enough to act on. But it hadn't been hers, and that was the end of it. She fell asleep that night, listening to the rain slow down and stop, and the last thing she thought about was whether she'd remembered to check the weather for Cassie's field trip on Friday. She had completely stopped thinking about it by the following Thursday. That was when the letter arrived. It came in an envelope that was the same cream color as the one she'd found on the sidewalk. Her name was typed on the front, Ms. Mabel Orin, with the same precision as everything else that came out of buildings with brass-button doormen. She almost didn't open it. She was standing at the kitchen counter with her coffee, still in the oversized t-shirt she slept in, and Cassie was somewhere in the back of the apartment looking for her left shoe, and the morning had that low-grade frantic energy of a Thursday, where everyone is running 4 minutes behind. She set the letter down on the counter next to the utility notice, still face down, and she forgot about it for approximately 2 hours. Then she opened it on her lunch break, in the break room at the dental office where she worked front desk, with the television in the corner, running a segment about fall foliage, and the coffee maker gurgling behind her. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed brief. It said that Mr. Gerald Whitfield was the founder and chairman of Whitfield Capital Partners, that the envelope she had returned had contained a signed private agreement that would have been significantly difficult to replace, that he was grateful beyond what the letter could properly express, and that he hoped she would allow him the opportunity to be of service in return. There was a phone number at the bottom. His personal assistants, the letter clarified. Not a corporate line. Mabel read it twice. Then she folded it along the same crease and put it back in the envelope and put it in her bag. She sat there for a moment with her hands around her coffee cup. Whitfield Capital Partners. She had heard that name. Most people had, if they paid any attention to financial news, which Mabel didn't particularly, but you absorbed things. You heard things in passing. She pulled out her phone and typed the name in and let the results load. The third result was a profile piece from a business magazine, dated 2 years ago. The headline said, Gerald Whitfield's Quiet Empire, How One Man Built a $4 billion Legacy Without Ever Raising His Voice. $4 billion. She had walked through the rain to return a signed agreement to a man worth $4 billion. She sat with that for a moment. Not stunned, exactly. More like when a picture you've been looking at from too close suddenly comes into focus and you see what it actually is. She put her phone away. She finished her coffee. She went back to the front desk. She called the number that evening, after Cassie was in bed. The assistant, a woman named Petra, with an efficient, warm voice, seemed to have been expecting the call. She asked if Mabel was available to meet with Mr. Whitfield at his office on Friday at 11, and Mabel said she'd have to check with her supervisor about taking a long lunch, and Petra said that Mr. Whitfield's car could pick her up and bring her back so there would be no commute time, and Mabel almost said no to that, but stopped herself. All right, she said. Friday at 11. She was quiet for a moment after she hung up. Then she went and looked at the utility notice on the counter. She turned it face up. She read it properly, all the way through, the way you read something when you've decided to stop pretending it isn't there. She was behind, not catastrophically. She'd been careful. She was always careful, but behind. The numbers didn't lie, and she'd been letting herself not look at them too directly, because looking at them directly made them feel more real, and more real made them feel more permanent. She folded the notice, set it next to the coffee maker. Friday, she told herself, see what the man has to say, and then decide. Gerald Whitfield's office occupied the top 2 floors of a building in the financial district that had windows that ran floor to ceiling on all sides. The view was the kind that made you feel briefly like the city was something that could be held, turned over in your hands, understood. Mabel had worn her good blazer, the navy one she kept for job interviews and occasions that called for a version of herself she didn't usually show. She'd ironed it herself the night before, while the news played low in the background, and she'd looked at herself in the bathroom mirror afterward and thought, fine. This is fine. You've been in rooms before. Gerald Whitfield was already standing when she came in. He crossed to her and shook her hand, properly, both hands, the way someone does when they mean it, and he asked if she wanted coffee, and she said yes because she actually did. Then he sat across from her at a table that was not his desk. A round table, 4 chairs, set with 2 coffees, and a small plate of pastries she didn't touch. I've been thinking about how to say this since last week, he said, and I've decided there isn't a good way, so I'll just say it plainly. That envelope contained a signed term sheet for an acquisition I've been working on for 11 months. If it had been lost, or opened by the wrong person, the deal would have been compromised, possibly destroyed. The other party has been looking for a reason to walk. This would have given them one. He picked up his coffee, set it down without drinking. I don't know what it cost you to bring it back, he said. I don't know what your situation is, but I watched the security footage from the doorman's camera. You were standing on that sidewalk for almost 2 minutes before you came in, and you didn't open it. Mabel looked at him. I thought about it, she said. He blinked. I want to be honest with you, she said. I stood there and I thought about it. I'm not going to pretend I didn't because that would make it sound like it wasn't a choice, and it was. I chose to bring it back. That matters to me. The fact that it was a choice. He was quiet for a moment. That, he said slowly, is the most honest thing anyone has said to me in this office in I don't know how long. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. My daughter has asthma, she said. We manage it, but the good inhaler, the one that actually works quickly, isn't fully covered. There's a gap between what insurance pays and what the pharmacy charges, and I cover that gap every month. And I have an outstanding balance with the utility company that I've been handling in installments. And the school trip deposit for my daughter's class is past due. She paused. I'm not telling you this to ask for anything. I'm telling you because you said you wanted to be honest, and I thought you deserved an honest answer about what thinking about it meant." Gerald Whitfield looked at her for a long moment. "Mrs. Orin," he said, "I'd like to help you." "I'm not interested in charity," she said. "Not sharp, just clear." "Neither am I," he said. "I've been in business for 38 years. I know what character looks like, and I know how rarely it shows up when it's inconvenient." He leaned forward slightly. "I have a property management company I'm in the process of reorganizing. I need someone at the front-end operations, client intake, administrative coordination, building relationships with tenants and property owners. The person I had in that role left in August, and I've been looking since then." He paused. "I looked you up, Ms. Orin. You've been running the front desk at Hargrove Dental for 6 years. Before that, 2 years at a law firm doing client intake. Before that, a year at a residential real estate office." She said nothing. "You have exactly the background I need," he said. "I'm not offering you a job because you returned my envelope. I'm offering you a job because you're qualified, and because you happened to return my envelope, which told me something about who you are that a resume can't." He sat back. "The position pays 31% more than what you're currently making. It comes with full benefits, including prescription coverage with no gap." The last part landed quietly. Mabel looked at the window. The city was still out there, held in the glass, gray-skied and enormous. She thought about the utility notice on her kitchen counter. She thought about Cassie, asleep right now in her school, probably annoying her science partner about volcanoes. She thought about standing on that sidewalk in the rain, with her hands around an envelope that wasn't hers, and the simple, uncomplicated clarity of "this isn't mine." She thought about how that choice had not felt like sacrifice. It had felt like something else entirely, like being without argument, exactly who she was. She looked back at Gerald Whitfield. "I'd want to see the full job description," she said. Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile. Something quieter than that, and better. "Of course," he said. "Petra will send it to you today." She told Cassie that night. Not everything. Not the part about standing on the sidewalk in the rain doing arithmetic with someone else's money. Not the part about the utility notice, or the inhaler gap, or the school trip deposit. Cassie was 14, and she didn't need to carry that. Mabel had always believed strongly that some weights belonged only to the person who'd earned them. But she told her about the envelope, about the walk to the building, about the man with the brass-button doorman, and the top-floor office, and the round table with the pastries she hadn't touched. Cassie listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her, and meant she was actually listening rather than preparing her response. When Mabel finished, Cassie said, "You could have just kept it." "I know," Mabel said, "but you didn't." "No." Cassie picked at the edge of her placemat. "Because it wasn't yours. Because it wasn't mine." Cassie thought about this. She had her father's way of going quiet when something mattered, holding it, turning it over, like she was checking it from all angles before she decided what she thought. "That's kind of a big deal, Mom," she said finally. "It was just the right thing to do." "Yeah," Cassie said, "but people say that all the time and then don't do it." Mabel looked at her daughter for a moment. "You're right," she said. "They do." They did the dishes together after that, the way they always did. Cassie washing and Mabel drying, the radio on low in the background, playing something that neither of them was really listening to. The kitchen was warm, and the window over the sink had fogged slightly at the corners from the steam. Ordinary things, the kind that fill up a life. The job offer came through formally the following Monday. Mabel read the job description twice, actually read it line by line, the way she read utility notices once she'd decided to stop looking away. It was a real position, a real company. The responsibilities matched her background almost exactly, and the salary was what Gerald Whitfield had said it was. And the benefits package included full prescription coverage with a $5 copay across the board. $5. The good inhaler, the one that worked quickly, the one she'd been stretching to 2.5 weeks instead of 2, because the pharmacy charged $94 for the difference. $5. She sat at the kitchen counter with the offer letter in front of her, and her coffee going cold beside her, and she pressed her hands flat on the table and breathed. She thought about who she'd been on that sidewalk, the version of herself that had picked up an envelope in the rain, thought carefully about what it meant to keep it, and set that thought aside not because she was selfless, but because she was herself. The version of herself that had walked through the rain and stood in a marble lobby and held her ground with a front desk employee who had looked at her like she was something that didn't fit. She thought about that woman. She thought she'd like to keep being her. She signed the offer letter that evening, scanned it, emailed it to Petra. Then she called Dolores next door and asked if she'd be willing to walk Cassie home from school on her first 2 weeks of training while she adjusted to the new schedule. And Dolores said of course, obviously, and also said she needed to know what was happening because Mabel sounded different. And Mabel laughed and said she'd tell her over coffee this weekend, and she meant it. She put her phone down on the counter. Outside, the city was doing what it always did, moving, humming, indifferent and enormous. Traffic somewhere below, a siren 2 blocks east, then fading. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary Wednesday night in a life that was quietly beginning to turn. Mabel stood at the window for a moment. She thought, I almost walked past it. She thought, I'm glad I didn't. And then she went to go check on Cassie. There's something we don't talk about enough, and it's this. The moments that change your life almost never look like moments that change your life. They look like a Tuesday afternoon in the rain. They look like a wet envelope half under a car. They look like standing still when it would be so much easier to just keep moving. Mabel Orin didn't walk 5 miles in a blizzard. She walked 3 blocks in November rain. She didn't sacrifice everything. She just didn't take something that wasn't hers to take. But the result was the same. A choice made quietly when no one was watching, with full knowledge of what it cost. That's what this story is really about. Not the reward. The reward is what happened. The story is the sidewalk and the 2 minutes and the plain, unargued decision. This isn't mine. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been on that sidewalk, holding something that could change things, and you did the right thing anyway, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. And if you're new here, welcome to Velvet Verdict. We tell stories like this one, stories about character and consequence, and the quiet moments that nobody sees until they matter. Hit subscribe if that sounds like something you want more of. We'll be here.